Hey, and welcome to the full crew. I'm Mike Peel, and today we're talking about space. We've got some great topics we're going to be discussing today, including satellite tow services, an increasingly important service. As space work expands, we need a space workforce, so we'll be talking about that too, and some road bumps that we'll have on the way to developing that technically skilled force. And then also legal issues in space exploration and extraction. So we might have a mining war on the horizon, or maybe not if we work out the legal aspects ahead of time. So we've got some great guests to talk about these topics today, and I'm going to start with Dave. So Dave, tell us a little bit about yourself and your expertise.
Yeah, good morning. Pleasure to be here. Thanks very much. Hello to the guests. So I'm lucky enough that over my career, I actually started with the U.S. Government in research and development in space, doing a number of firsts that occurred there. Been lucky enough to have also dabbled in the entrepreneurial side. So I've got 3 startups under the belt. Also had developed the first space research center at the University of Southern California, and was a DARPA PM during that time. At the moment, I'm the CEO of a company called Arkisys, and also still supporting research professorship at USC, getting challenged every single day by up and coming students. So pleasure to be here. Thanks very much.
Yeah, excited to have you on for your first show. Now we've also got a return guest, and Tracy's worked with us on a lot of our other projects, including WhatsApp Connect. She always has a great voice on topics that are truly hard to understand, and she puts them in nice, clear, succinct words. So Tracy, tell us a little bit about yourself and what you do.
Thank you for that kind introduction. My name is Tracy Reynolds. I'm an active duty United States Navy judge advocate, which means that I have both the profession of arms and the profession of law. I'm here in my personal capacity today, and everything that I say is my opinion alone, not that of the Department of Defense or the Department of the Navy. I feel really fortunate because being underway on the USS Carl Vinson as the judge advocate for Carrier Strike Group 1 changed my life, because that's where I learned about the space cadre. And that's what really got me into a more full understanding of how the science fiction and outer space shows and books I loved as a kid were coming to life. So it's exciting to be here today with all of these experts to talk about what's new in news and reporting as we kind of try to go out into the great beyond.
Yeah, it's truly amazing how these technologies overlap in ways that you would not think until you were at the seat, right? And space technology, satellites, communications provide a backbone to a lot of our other technologies. So I want to also introduce Tom. So Tom, tell us a little bit about yourself.
Thanks, Mike. I'm Tom Coakley. I am currently an academic dean at a community college in the Denver metro area. I'm also the executive director of the Colorado Space Institute, which is geared towards enabling community college students and higher education students writ large throughout the state to gain access to the space industry. I'm a retired Air Force colonel. I was a professor at the Air Force Academy for a number of years. For my 06 command, I ran the intelligence training programs for the United States Air Force and a lot for DoD. We were doing a lot of the data analytics that were derived from space resources. And when I followed that with my final job, which was directing an OPIR enterprise at Buckley Space Force Base, I realized that the work that we were doing, while it was really kind of filling a lot of the roles on the operations force at Buckley, it really wasn't meeting the full operational need. And that's something that we're focused on at the Colorado Space Institute, is ensuring that employers have the workforce they need to grow and flourish.
Well, thank you for your help in providing education and direction and career development for the future of not only our country, but space itself. All right, let's go on to our first article. And actually, first, I would like to thank our sponsors, Carasoft Aiken, Flyability, and Quantum Systems for making this show possible. And our first article is going to be Dave's. So space industry leaders want action to fill. Oh, No, that's actually Tom's. So
Yeah.
Tom, you're up.
Okay, sounds good. Thank you very much. So my article really is kind of looking at just an industry recognition that our workforce for the space industry is not sufficient to sustain growth within the industry. One of the things that has been noted is that in 2024, there was a slight dip in the numbers of new space professionals who were hired into the industry. But based on a lot of projections for growth within the industry, there's some projections that this global space economy could expand to 1.8 trillion by 2030, 2035. That sort of growth is really only going to be possible if we have technicians who are able to deliver, whether it's in manufacturing jobs, whether it's actually using the data that is derived from space for a whole host of industries, from basic national defense, national security jobs to really agriculture. There's a multi-billion-dollar agricultural space industry. The growth has been really kind of enabled by workforce. And when I talk to industry leaders, and this is something I noticed on active duty as well, we're really limited in the national security area by a lack of cleared engineers, cleared data analysts, cleared data scientists. And it's something that I kind of like to discuss today with you, Mike, and with our other panelists if they have an interest in doing so.
Yeah, in all technology fields that we deal with on this show, there is the skills gap, and so much of that is, I think people think it's we're not educating people sometimes, or that it's that people aren't smart enough, or that we don't have good enough people here, or whatever it is, or that we actually can't even import people. It comes down to literally the career path is blocked in one way or another in a lot of cases. Like, you need specialized training that doesn't happen unless you're on the job, so that's already creating like a bottleneck, right? So I'm really interested in throwing the question back to you at some point, but what paths can we develop in making this more open or more accessible to employers? Like, what are they saying they can't find, and what is the process for even opening those doors?
I'll defer to Dave a little bit as a CEO of a space company and also an educator. But a lot of the companies I talk to here in Colorado, we do get many students through 4-year engineering programs. CU Boulder has one of the leading aerospace engineering undergraduate programs in the country. Colorado State University and Colorado School of Mines produce a lot of really top talent. Some of that talent will head to California, to Southern California. Some of it will remain here. But the biggest gap that I've seen, and this is in conversation after conversation, is really with kind of technician level skills, right? We are focused at the Colorado Space Institute on really kind of certificate and 2-year degree programs to meet industry need. And the gaps that I'm hearing repeatedly are in space data. So, the operations floor at Buckley Space Force Base, some of the offices at Peterson Space Force Base in Schriever, a lot of those technicians, the civilians, really are former enlisted men and women with security clearances who have maybe a certificate or a 2-year degree. But there's often a gap between the reality of what's needed in terms of education and what HR offices will post for the need. Oftentimes, the barrier is a bachelor's degree or even a graduate degree, whereas a lot of the work that can be done in space data only doesn't require that level of education. The other things are specialized manufacturing skills. It's one thing to say we need space manufacturers, but that's everything from mechanics technicians to electronics technicians to people who are good with composites. Those are very specialized degree paths. And if you look at a lot of the workforce in the industry, there are folks who've grown up in other industries, everything from beginning as mechanics to engineers who decided they really like to tinker with their hands rather than to work on designs. To a lesser extent, we also get a request for more cyber security professionals, DoD requirements for CMMC certification for cybersecurity. That bar can be pretty high for particularly smaller companies. And then finally, business-related work, logistics, supply chains, and that sort of thing.
So it certainly appears more nuanced than most public conversations about it would lead you to believe. So Dave, what's your real world experience in this, being on the other side of the tennis court, so to speak?
I appreciate it, and I actually absolutely appreciate Tom, specifically related to what he identifies as a 2-year associates. There is, for whatever reason, there was a stigma associated with that you have to get a 4-year degree, otherwise you're realistic.
Work smarter, not harder. Right?
Yeah. So honestly, I can tell you that completely resonate with the direction that Tom indicated, related to individuals that have more hands-on experience. I mean, honestly, it's something that unfortunately went away many years ago when the vocational aspect of high school got shifted, right? One of the things that I found is that some of the best students that come out of the various universities aren't the ones that are at the theoretical level or the hypothetical level. They're the ones that have done either student organization activities or have worked with either professors or PIs on sort of hands-on kind of research activities. The one that I think is really interesting, that there's emergence between the investment that the United States does in small businesses and how we can potentially translate that into universities, is the SBIR STTR process. Sometimes it's lauded, sometimes it's derated.
Wait, that's a big acronym. What is that?
Oh, sorry. Yeah, SBIR is Small Business Innovative Research, and STTR is maybe Tom, something technology transfer readiness. The STTR is an interesting approach because it requires an academic institution or more research. So it actually merges those two together. The SBIR is more for small business. The only reason I bring that up is that by small companies or any companies having any of those grants, they can reach into universities, and therefore that actually helps not just the PI and the university, but also gets students involved on hands-on applied activities. And that's where, again, I absolutely concur with Tom that the word technician somehow has a negative connotation to people's minds. And yet, if you're a technician in a spacecraft laboratory, you have to have a higher level of skill than sort of a normal technician in an electronics lab, because you're dealing with spacecraft hardware. So I completely agree that those levels of sort of students or people coming out of the universities and academic environment, we really need them. They're hard to find.
So Tracy, I'm sure you've been face to face with skills development in the Department of Defense, which is a real mandate that institution has. What do you see from your side in the space workforce?
This is a really fascinating conversation that impacts me not only professionally in the work that I have trying to break down these component topics in a way that they can be applied at the tactical level with individual technicians and decision makers, but also because I have 4 children and I'm on the board for a local high school. And so in that capacity, I'm going to back up a little bit, because what I'm hearing is very tactical and it's excellent. But to align that more to kind of the strategic level, if you will, I think what the Department of Defense and universities and corporations are missing is a style of thinking and problem solving. Because these very specific licensures and education pathways are absolutely necessary in order to do this very specific work. But I believe the article also mentioned that employers really value grit and problem solving. And that's something that all students need to learn, regardless of whether they're going to go into outer space or impact space. And there are teaching methodologies that focus more specifically on being able to solve those problems when they come at you in an unconventional way. And you're not going to see that anywhere else like you do in space. It is a combination of fast decision making in a dynamic environment where you may or may not be right about what's going on because of geography, time, distance, technology, and expanding capabilities of that technology that you have to master to make those good decisions. So I'm really curious if, in my fellow panelists' perspectives, if they see more maybe non-conventional strategic level type of thinking being taught in addition to those technical skills that are necessary to be successful in these very specific skill paths.
Yeah, I think so. I mean, to echo what you're saying, Tracy, and also to something that Dave was talking about, really kind of anytime you can have active learning, applied learning, it was also called experiential learning. That's, kind of best practice among educators as the way to really, address things like grit. To address one of the things that I hear from a lot of employers is that they want to hire folks who can just tinker their way to solutions, right? To keep exploring, to be just intellectually curious about the projects that they're working on. One of the best ways to do that is through, you know, think about the technicians who come into our homes, electricians, plumbers. They go through apprenticeship programs, very formal apprenticeship programs. Those can be incredibly great ways to learn, particularly if you work side by side with a master plumber who really knows his or her craft. Something very similar could happen, and I've seen it on very small scales, even in something as esoteric sounding as data analytics, artificial intelligence, algorithm creation. I work with a very small company here in the Denver metro area called Bedrock Research. They are developing AI algorithms to really screen space-derived imagery in new ways. And one of their best employees is an 18-year-old high school student who works about 10 to 20 hours a week as an intern, just kind of just a very, very fascinated, hungry young student who's getting incredibly high-end mentorship from a couple of PhDs, former researchers at Lockheed Space. If we could find a way to really kind of bottle that, that product, you can crack open a bottle of space technician root beer, if you will. It'd be incredible what we could do for the United States' space workforce.
Well, to me, it really almost sounds like professionalizing play, because this type of approach, where you're tinkering and stacking and taking apart and putting back together, it seems that young people really treasure that type of activity, and then they hit a formal education system that takes it out of them. And then you have to build it back in order to get those skill levels again. Coastal Virginia is really trying to attack that problem by partnering with pre-educational services through high school and into community college with evidence-based quantitative type of teaching methods that are pioneered by the University of Virginia's teaching department. And then you see that partnership continue to deepen, particularly in aviation with Tidewater Community College, where there are building programs specific for drone operators in line of sight scenarios. And it would be great to continue building on that type of work. I don't think anybody expects a little kid to be able to know what they want to be when they grow up. But I also don't expect an 18-year-old to have the same job until they die. I think that paradigm, right, the Archie Bunker paradigm, where you worked at a factory for 40 years and got your gold pocket watch and your pension is over. And being able to teach these types of dynamic skills to kids. I mean, my third grader builds a roller coaster as part of her STEM unit. They build cardboard sweeping units. There's all kinds of technology understanding happening at the elementary school through high school levels. It's just connecting it in a way that results in employment. And who knows, maybe those are our next PhDs as well.
Yeah, there's certainly been a development there's a rising need to address the fact that liberal arts doesn't address everything, right? And we've, for a very, very long time, eschewed trade schools or apprenticeship as a mode of developing our youth's skills. And I think there's a little bit of a rebalancing on that, but just perspective-wise, that is probably going to find a better balance between the two, right? Final words from Tom before we move on to the next topic.
Really fascinating conversation. I hope I can talk to both Tracy and Dave about this at some point in the future. Just kind of one thing as a teaser out there, something that we're working on with Colorado's federal delegation is, working within kind of the SBIR, STTR construct to see if there are opportunities to build an apprenticeship programs for Colorado high school and community college students to potentially have apprenticeship pathways into national security clearance requiring jobs. It's going to be a lot of work, but I think there's a lot of hunger for that. And I just wanted to leave it at that. And I appreciate the opportunity to answer questions.
Well, thanks for a great article, Tom. Now we're going to move on to, I think it's Dave's this time. Let's see what happens. Yeah, Space Development Agency studying options for satellite tow services. So, Dave, tell us a little bit about this and why you thought it was interesting.
Yeah, no, I appreciate it. I brought this up because there's the new sort of domain in space there's a number of different monikers that are used. The general one is space servicing, basically doing things to other spacecraft in space after they have launched. Space is the only domain, even still today, where you design and build something on the ground for one mission and one life. After it's done, you throw it away. It's the only domain that we do that. Finally, technology has gotten to the point where we can now begin to think about doing things to either maintain, extend its life, refuel, modify, add things to it, very similar to every other domain on Earth. So the SDA put out a study that actually wanted people in industry to basically say, are there potential commercial options for, it wasn't necessarily tow services. What it was is if there was an SDA satellite in one of the constellations that they're planning to put up that was non-operational and it wasn't able to bring itself down out of an orbit, could a commercial service go up, connect to it, rendezvous, connect to it, and then physically bring it down? That way, there's no gap. They send up another one, and they can continue to do their mission. The reason I sort of raised the article is that for the longest time, if you really want to change the entire culture of integrating things on the ground for one mission, one life, but now you want to do it in orbit where you can extend the life, there has to be an anchor customer. There has to be a reason for it. There has to be an inflection point. And so I really thought the SDA, at least they did a study, which is great, but they were the first agency in the United States that actively said, hey, this new domain and the technology capability of space servicing, we think it might have some legs here. We'd like people to go take a look at it. So that's sort of why I brought it up. It was sort of a beginning point, if you will, for space services.
So what are some of the issues that they're facing where we need these services? Can you enumerate them in a little bit more detail?
Well, so yeah, so it's interesting because to date there has been no need, right? That there's the challenge. However, what's interesting is if you translate specifically in the military domain, the kinds of things that are used all the time in the air and in sea and in land, and that is maneuverability, extending of life, the ability to see beyond the battlefield. If you take those and you apply those into space, Well, now it means that you would need to refuel a satellite, as an example, or you need to have the ability to move much more than it's already designed for. So those translate to, in essence, either a refueling station in orbit, as an example. If you wanted to add a new sensor, which is from the military standpoint, as an example, it would be, I want to see in a different domain or a different optical wavelength in a certain area that we think it's required. You can't do that if it's already in orbit in today's world. Servicing would allow you to then add something to it, and therefore you extend its mission. On the commercial side, that basically means you extend its marketability and therefore its potential revenue stream. So that's where this new domain of space servicing is so promising. And we hear these numbers of, $1 trillion industry in 2030 and 2040. All of that is related to what more can we do in space that we haven't done today.
Tracy, do you have any opinions on the new capabilities that space servicing might provide?
I think we're at a really dynamic and exciting time. I believe it was in 1978 when a scientist first came up with the Kessler effect or the Kessler syndrome. That's just the general thought that all of the things in low Earth orbit will get to a point that they're all colliding with each other and such that space pollution will just naturally occur to the point where we either no longer have access to low Earth orbit, we can't use things in low Earth orbit, or all of the above. So it's not a new problem in that sense. But the technology and capabilities, gosh, the financial cost is extreme. And some folks are talking about how it's really only government entities that will be able to bring the necessary stakeholders together to address that problem. You know, I appreciate the comment about this happening in the US. I think maybe the Japan Aerospace Exploration Agency may be a little bit in front of us in the sense that they have joined with a Swiss company in order to launch a satellite. I believe it's 2026 or 2028, whose entire purpose is to help deorbit dead satellites or those that are past mission. So I think we're at the stage where we're going to start really seeing what those standard operating procedures or SOPs really are going to look like. And it's exciting because we're kind of developing it as we go along. And in the military, we always talk about, what do we need first, the authority to do the thing or the capability to do it? And when people ask me that question, I really, it's, classic chicken and egg, right? But in my opinion, they develop concurrently. And so as these capabilities continue to develop in technology, the relationships can be built, and the relationships can be built to encourage the development of the technology. So I might see it just a little bit differently because of those advancements, but it is an exciting time in order to try to create those deep relationships and build those connections across governments and deep into private corporations to try to address these issues.
Something you said kind of sparked up a thought in my mind about having our space junk apocalypse is not necessarily just from the slow degradation of devices already in the atmosphere. It can also be caused by a state actor on purpose if they wanted to, right?
No, absolutely, and we've seen that happen, right? With ASAT technology launches, where anti-satellite launches from the terrestrial environment can cause unintended consequences that, gosh, not even AI can really project out. But I think our elementary students that we were talking about building roller coasters earlier can tell you that if you throw two things at each other and they break into pieces, the pieces are going to go scattering around, and everybody should watch out. But we're going to have to start tying some finances to this in order to come up with those types of solutions. And I definitely agree that it's a $1 trillion industry. And that is something that we can be building right now, but it's not easy.
It's a perfect tragedy of the commons example, isn't it? So Tom, what are your thoughts?
Really fascinating conversation. Is Dave was kind of describing space services. The former military officer that ran a big satellite enterprise for DoD, and the intelligence community got excited about the possibility, to change out sensors to really make operational capabilities a lot more dynamic. I guess we have a history of that in this country. NASA with the what was it, the contact lens with the mirror for Hubble, which is getting back in the press because of it reached a milestone this year. Um, Really fascinating from a workforce development perspective. It's exciting to think about the types of jobs that the third graders working on the roller coaster at home, or the cardboard sweeper could be looking at. One of the things that we really are mindful of is developing kind of you know uh, an understanding, kind of a space mindset, if you will, right? So regardless of what you're majoring, maybe you are a liberal arts person, maybe you're in some very specific field like automotive technician. If we are moving to an economy that a lot of our jobs are servicing the space industry, which is fulfilling so many other national and global uh, commercial and national security needs, we're going to need a really flexible workforce that can adapt to those moments based on emerging technologies, the ability to apply new technologies to solve longstanding problems is going to become increasingly important.
Dave, any final comments on the article?
Well, to try to tie it together to what Tracy and Tom were saying, the what servicing in space really translates to is a complete rethink of how space systems are put together, and what that translates to eventually for students to have to think differently about design. Typically, we integrate and build things on the ground and then launch them, and that's it. But what we're talking about doing now is completely shifting that to being able to modify things and do things differently on orbit. What that requires is a rethink on how the entire systems are actually put together and how they operate. So from that standpoint, I think it's exciting, and it's also a challenge. To sort of Tracy's point a while ago, is that the institutions, and I can say this directly, teach a specific set of activities and fundamentals, but what is missing in some sense is the ability to take those things and then think differently and apply it in a different way. So space servicing, in all honesty, requires that. It has to have that complete new rethink. So that's really sort of what drove me relative to the article, is that it's a point that at least one government agency, and yes, there are others around the world, that are finally thinking, we want to go do this. And if it's just because to clean things up in space, it still requires different levels of thinking and design for the space systems that are going to go do that. So for me, it's pretty exciting.
Yeah, it kind of reminds me of some factory waste processes that in the past had just led to landfill, right? But a lot of companies in the last 15 to 20 years actually have been looking at the waste product that they produce and seeing if they could sell that off to another industrial process, and thinking in terms of, okay, if we know that, how do we make sure it fits the requirements of that new industrial process before we even make it in the first place? And this has led to design choices that now create for a better pipeline in general. So it's not even recycle, reuse. It's thinking about extendability from the get-go.
Yeah, that's right. That's exactly right.
All right. So now we're going to go in Tracy's territory. So space industry. Oh no. Scholar Monica Ehrman explores legal issues in space exploration and extraction of resources. So my RTS mindset got triggered on this. I was just thinking of kind of everybody in a free-for-all going for these valuable assets, and I think it's interesting that kind of a peaceful framing or a nondescript framing that can actually lead to this war against all in space. So Tracy, tell us a little bit about this article and why we need to kind of develop a legal framework for how resources are extracted in space.
Professor Ehrman is just a very interesting person, and her perspective is influenced by her role as a lawyer for a big oil company, and also her work in engineering that led her to being given an honorary engineering degree from SMU. And so now she's teaching law, thinking about resource extraction in outer space. And she's one of the first scholars to recognize that, hey, we've done this before, but here on Earth. And she teaches us that the 1870 mining law is what the United States domestic legal obligation would be for resource extraction in outer space. And for those of you with your eyebrows up in your hair wondering how in the world that could be applicable, she does a great job of explaining the outer space treaty regime that governs international legal obligations and serves as the overarching legal construct. And she points out that that construct developed during the Cold War era, really focused on the potential of a nuclear event in outer space or a terrestrial target being targeted for a nuclear action, has really led to a focus on outer space as a military area. And of course, my Department of Defense, Department of the Navy focus clearly recognizes outer space as the domain to rule them all, in the sense that without outer space, you don't have intelligence law, you don't have geospatial positioning, you don't have, I mean, the don't haves go on and on and on. And it's important to take a moment to think through the legal regimes here, because as folks who work with me know, my favorite thing to do is to make new mistakes and not make the same old mistakes over and over and over again. And Professor Ehrman's focus on resource extraction in a terrestrial environment, informing the actions that we take in outer space, I think is really the major takeaway here. I think one theme that influences and binds all three of our conversations that we've had thus far is a new way of thinking, informed by what we've learned in the past, building relationships and bridging seemingly unrelated constructs and topics so that we can have forward-thinking folks that are well-trained to tackle these unique situations. And outer space resource extraction is going to hit on all of those things. And this probably won't come as a shock to you that I'm going to bring up the maritime environment, but there is a place that's difficult to reach, that has lots of resources, with lots of folks that have expertise in dealing with those areas, and it's undersea cables. And it is resource extraction in the Arctic. Maybe there's some lessons learned there that could be influential. And I think Professor Ehrman is going to be kind of at the forefront of these forward thinkers. You know, the American Society of International Law's annual meeting was last week, and there was a speaker there talking about startup companies in Southern California that are thinking about the infrastructure and the legal regime necessary to support resource extraction in outer space. And I asked that person, oh, are they looking at the maritime environment for lessons learned? And he looks at me and he goes, no, why would they do that? And it's that type of thinking that I think we're all trying to challenge here. And Professor Ehrman's at the forefront of that.
Yeah, although it's cross-disciplinary, I mean, all you have to do is list some of the nouns and verbs and substitute them, and you see that these two things correlate rather well, like you were saying. So let's go to Dave. You have any opinions on this?
Yeah, no, I hats off to thinking about the salvage law in the Navy. When I was at DARPA, I was lucky enough to have been asked to go present in front of the Committee on the Peaceful Uses of Outer Space in Vienna on a program that I was pushing relative to repurposing things in orbit. And the big question was, well, you can't do that because there's no law that allows that. I said, well, wait a minute. There's the entire law of the sea relative to salvage that goes on every single day, and nobody questions that. Why is any different? And yes, they would bring up, well, the Outer Space Treaty doesn't have this, and the Liability Convention. Like, oh my gosh, guys.
Well, in the Navy, we call that decision space. You know, you don't list out every little thing in a civil law system because there's no way to anticipate all of the specificity.
That's right. That's right. So it's totally concur. This idea, I had a conversation once at what I would call a super geek conference at a time, and my point was you have to do both at the same time. Exactly what you indicated, Tracy, is that the idea of legal or bureaucratic or political, which is the will to go do something, has to be done at the same time relative to the technical. It's not enough to do the technical. So the argument, relative to space servicing or even going and extracting materials from an extraterrestrial source, technically, a lot of folks are buying into that, and I believe that's going to happen. But your whole point is that we really need to think about how do we make sure we don't get into a big space war by one small little company going up and grabbing the nodule off of some asteroid, and then somebody else on the Earth saying, "Wait a minute, you can't do that." So, no, I totally agree. There's analogies here. It's surprising to me that we don't use them.
Yeah, and I think there's also an opening for not just state actors, but let's say the Weyland-Yutani Corporation deciding that they're their own country, right?
Yes.
We've mined enough resources on this extraterrestrial planet, so now we own it, and we have enough guns, so come take it from us, right? That's not an environment we want in space. We want an environment that's closer to what we have on the seas, where treaties, negotiations, and yes, force and the threat of force help make sure that we have international trade, and development of things like cable communications that happen. So very, very interesting. So Tom, what's your take now that I've opened the door even a little bit more to speculation?
Yeah, it's incredibly fascinating to think about, right? I mean, one of the I mentioned one of the legal questions that a lot of the companies we work with are interested in, and that's security clearances. But from a fascinating perspective, we do meet with a lot of major and minor donors as well, who are really interested in helping develop workforce. And one of the questions I repeatedly get, and I might have to follow up with Tracy, is visionary donors who are concerned about what space regulation could do to either accelerate or hobble growth within the space industry in particular. And then a few of them do also have kind of an eye towards resource extraction. Here in Colorado, about 20 minutes from my house, the Colorado School of Mines has a graduate program in basically, let's just call it space mining. And so some of our students are interested in going down that path, but definitely kind of fascinating to think about how all of these things will either accelerate that multi-trillion-dollar space industry or how it might hamper it. And as a former military officer, I've got to agree with Tracy's emphasis on providing as much decision space as possible within any sort of legal regime that we watch grow.
Tracy, any feedback on Tom's comments?
Well, I love how much we're in agreement. and this is just a wonderful example of how these seemingly unconnected areas come together when we start talking about problem solving in outer space. And if we continue with that type of bridge building, then I think we're going to be able to address these problems. I really appreciate the comment about hobbling versus helping. And I have 21 subordinate commands in my current line of work, and I'm in regular communications with all of them. And I'm always telling them, show the pain, because my goal as your superior is not to hurt you on purpose. So if I'm making a decision that is painful for you, show me so that we can fix it, because that's not the intent. And I also appreciate bringing up the UN Committee on the Peaceful Purposes of Outer Space, because that is an organization that operates by consensus. Consensus is slow. Sometimes that's good. Sometimes that's bad. But it is all about that decision space and clear communication. The US is unique in the sense that our copious representative is very interested in private industry's perspective. And the Department of State is seeking continued partnership with private industry to make sure that those perspectives are communicated at the UN level. And it's that type of forward thinking led by the United States through these intergovernmental and non-governmental organizations and private industry with educators, with visionary investors, that we'll be able to come up with these ideas. The hard part is thinking of all the things, but that's what the bridge building is for, right? And leaders like Professor Ehrman and forums such as this, this is where we can really make those connections and then carry it out into the world to continue solving the problems and hopefully making new mistakes instead of the same old ones.
Tracy, what you're saying just makes me think about the entire history of space exploration. I think sometimes people try to rewrite it as it was a public thing, but if you go to even the Aerospace Museum here in Nassau County, you see Northrop Grumman, you see all of these other private corporations. So it was always a public-private partnership because the scale of the problem is large. But the need for innovation, the need for direction from industry and input from industry has always been there, and that's probably the path forward in space, is some form of public-private partnership from every aspect, not just the technical, but also the regulatory, policy, and collaboration space among countries and corporations. So any final comments on this article before we end the show, Tracy?
I just think it's all about the people. And bureaucracies are a great framework. Companies are an amazing institution, but it's the human innovators, the people reaching out to other people in these different entities that are going to create the forward change. And that's where the education and the private companies and the governments and bureaucracies are going to be able to come together to solve this. Just my 2 cents.
Well, thank you, Tracy, again for participating. Thanks, both Dave and Tom, for providing great articles. Also, I want to thank our sponsors, Carasoft, Flyability, Quantum Systems, and Aiken for making this show possible, as well as the audience for tuning in and participating. You've helped make this actually our most popular show on Dawn's network. We've got a great show coming up tomorrow on Dawn of Autonomy. So you'll see the title card for that when we exit. Again, thank you everybody for participating, and we are out here.